On June 6th, Forrest announced on Dale's site that the chest had been found. We learned very little about the discovery or the finder. The most elucidating piece of information was the gender pronoun. But Forrest promised photos and more information. Last Monday, December 7th, was certainly a fulfillment of that promise. More information came out last week than at any other time in the chase. In this video, I want to provide an overview of the information we have, see if we can put it together and figure out what we're looking at. Let's build our timeline and get an overview of what happened this summer and this fall. On June 16th, the original announcement was updated to include 3 photographs: the open chest photo, the turquoise bracelet photo, and a picture of Forrest going through the items like a kid in a candy shop. There was an introductory statement, and each photograph had a caption, but there wasn't a great deal of the promised information. Finally, about 5 weeks later, on July 22nd, Forrest updated the announcement one last time. He gave the state. Forrest also promised the finder he would neither reveal his identity nor where it was hidden. Forrest passed away on Labor Day, September 7th, and a couple of weeks later, on September 23rd, something unexpected happened. The finder, still remaining anonymous, posted a remembrance. This gave us a window into the finder's methodology, and I want to camp here and talk about this. We now have a wealth of information on this topic, and these are not just insights from an intelligent searcher. This is the correct way to go about it. So before I talk about everything that came out last week, let's revisit this first Medium article. People have asked why Jack wrote this if he hoped to remain anonymous, and the answer seems to be that not only did he like and admire Forrest very much, but he'd spent over 2 years closely studying a man who had meditated deeply on the subject of his own departure. Jack says he spent 2 years living inside Forrest's head. In the same way that a lot of people treated Forrest like a clue dispenser, I think a lot of searchers didn't notice how beautiful and heartfelt this was. At one point, Jack resorts to poetry to express his feelings. In this vein, one of the big revelations in this remembrance is that the finder suggested he first figured out where Forrest wanted to die, rather than solving the first clue in the poem. In fact, he doesn't talk about interpreting the poem until halfway through the article. By that time, he's brought up Forrest's chosen burial site a second time for good measure. Having figured out the general area where Forrest wanted to die, he went boots on the ground and searched there. He says he knew the general area, whatever that means, and was able to prove this and have confidence in this beyond a reasonable doubt. He knew he was close. The next big reveal is that the finder says he was aided by a couple of slip-ups. He uses this language later as well, so I really believe he's telling us that he found 2. We also know that if you locate a slip-up and it's one that many people have found and discussed, then that's not what he's talking about. The finder was familiar with the forums and the streamers, and he never saw anyone else put their finger on these. So aided by 2 slip-ups and the certain knowledge of generally where Forrest wanted to die, the finder spent days and weeks at the site. I wonder what this entails. Did he just need to keep trying different solves for the remaining clues? Did he canvass the area with a metal detector? Interestingly, he jumps to the last clue, the blaze. Jack found one, but it was a fake. It had been there for a few years. He says it was created by a fellow searcher. He says it was cruel, I assume, because it was created to deceive, as any fake blaze would. And he says it took him some effort to figure out that it had been faked. Lastly, he says that fake blaze was less than 1,000 feet from where I eventually found the treasure, which I suppose is Jack getting the very best kind of revenge. This raises many questions. Did Jack go straight from discovering Forrest's burial site generally to looking for the blaze? And how could Jack have known that he was looking at a fake blaze unless he knew what he was looking for? That is, unless he knew what the real blaze looked like. And this other searcher who created this, Were they really a searcher for this treasure? Did they know they were close? How could they create a fake blaze unless they knew what the real blaze looked like? Can we assume that this person has the best chance of being the next one to find the hiding spot? On a more fundamental level, we get a glimpse of the finder's methodology. We learn that the finder, like every other serious searcher, spent a great deal of time dissecting Forrest's words, in the memoir and elsewhere. He mentions analyzing facial expressions and tone. The finder thought deeply about information given in interviews. He wasn't trying to backdoor a solve, but he wasn't exactly a poem purist. He says he had to stick to the evidence, not stray into hunches and speculation not strictly supported by the facts. He says he took pains to avoid confirmation bias. Keep these 4 things in mind. We're going to see them come up again. The article addresses the issue of what the finder intends to do with the chest, but it's a little confusing. He says he will sell it. However, he also says Forrest had a final wish for where he thought it should end up. Most people have thought this statement refers to a museum because Forrest spoke about this kind of thing. How do we reconcile these? Will he only sell to a buyer who agrees to let it sit in a museum for a certain amount of time? Or will he loan it to a museum first and then sell it? This remembrance, the first Medium article, also contains 6 more photographs, including 3 more photographs taken in the office with the big table. Lastly, he answers something that searchers have wondered about: the double omegas. Although Jack didn't ask Forrest specifically what the symbol meant, he tells readers that he did not consider it a hint. He didn't use the colophon in his solve. It wasn't helpful. He signs off with the double omegas, but then below that, a single asterisk. It's really poignant that after so many words honoring Forrest, he can simply type the asterisk, and it speaks volumes. Then, on December 7th, 3 months to the day from Forrest's passing, and 6 months and 1 day from the discovery of the chest, there was a simultaneous release of several communications: the Outside Magazine article by Daniel Barbarisi, the second Medium article answering the why question, why Jack is coming forward now, and the statement from Shiloh posted on Dale's site, which confirms Jack's identity and the veracity of his account. The Outside article expands on all the elements of the first Medium article, starting with Jack's methodology. It says he devoured all the primary source material, anything with Forrest speaking. Jack wanted to hear Forrest's words directly to get insight into his personality and motivation. I don't want to ruin this treasure hunt by saying it was made for an English major, but it's based on a close read of a text. It's having the correct interpretation of a poem. I understand him by reading his words and listening to him talk over and over and over and over again, and seeking out anything I could get my hands on that told me who he was. The solution is tied far more to understanding Fenn's emotions and to a close examination of the poem itself than to puzzle-solving skills. Fenn simply didn't care about those kinds of things. He was more interested in adventure, legacy, history, narrative. There was no reason to think that those things would be something he was interested in or had any experience in. He was coming to this not from the perspective of being a huge fan of puzzles or a puzzle master. He was not a fan of armchair treasure hunts. His point of reference was pirates. His purpose was not to create a great puzzle and show everyone how smart and slick he was. His purpose was this weird idea to entomb himself and to create a historic legend. None of that supports armchair solutions, and he was open about that. The author reasserts that figuring out where Forrest wanted to die was not only crucial, but perhaps even primary chronologically. He also reiterates that the slip-ups played a key role. Again, a couple, 2. And there's also more talk of the blaze. Not the fake blaze. We learn that when Jack found the real one, it was damaged. This drives home a point I made earlier. Jack knew what he was looking for. He knew what the blaze would be, so much so that when he found a fake blaze, he recognized it for what it was, and when he found the real blaze, he knew it had been damaged. The article also fleshes out a bit more what the chest's discovery looked like. It says, he retrieved the chest on Saturday, June 6, 2020, in Wyoming, and began the long drive down to Santa Fe to deliver it to Fenn that same day. In a couple of as soon as statements, we hear the sense of urgency that Forrest felt about telling searchers. This helps us build a timeline for that weekend. However, this statement here is misleading, and this graphic here does not depict what actually happened. I'll come back to this in a moment. The article talks a lot about what transpired since June 6th. Jack's justification for anonymity and for not revealing the solve or the hiding spot, what he calls the most difficult question to answer. It also mentions that Forrest was going to try to help Jack with getting a certain party to buy it. Again, he mentions the part about it being displayed, so perhaps Forrest knew this individual personally and knew that they would accommodate the request to have a museum be in custody of the chest for a season. Over at Medium, Jack was able to stop being the finder and update his profile. In his second post, he goes into great detail explaining that the lawsuit had forced his hand. This is the driving force behind the article. You read this and it makes you wonder if you would switch positions with Jack if given the chance. A few other items come to light here, things unrelated to the lawsuit. We can update our list here. Jack says a couple of items were missing from the chest. The 17th century Spanish gold ring with an emerald found at San Lazaro, and the small gold frog on a necklace pictured here on the left. Surprisingly, when Jack asked about this item, Forrest was able to produce it from his vault and present it to him. The ring, however, is lost. Jack also pointed readers to his YouTube channel, where last year he posted a single video on cognitive bias.
Hey guys, this is Jack.
Also Monday, he uploaded the raw footage from the New Mexico tourism commercial. I think the takeaway here is that discovering $1 million treasure is a good way to increase page traffic. In the raw footage, Forrest falls into the usual stories we've heard before, but in between are some interesting bits. At about the 41-minute mark, we learn firsthand that the drawings and photographs in the memoir are in play as far as hints. Jack says he obtained the footage in early 2019, and by that time he had already figured out the hypothetical final resting place. So this footage does not contain some kind of key that unlocks everything. Jack says this explicitly. You might remember the finished product had a line that launched 1,000 forum posts.
Pine needles or pinon nuts, sagebrush, and I know the treasure chest is wet. Well, you've asked me a lot of questions that most of them I've answered, a few I haven't, but I gotta tell you, there's one thing I told you that I wish I had not.
It turns out this line was Forrest's interpretation of something the director wanted. The line he was fed was, "I've already said too much," and Forrest complied, gave the performance, twice actually, reinterpreting the statement but capturing the enigmatic thrust of it. It's not about pinion nuts. It's not even about the chest being wet. It's nothing. Jack's other post has actually been around for a while. We just didn't know it was a post from someone who had already figured out the general area and would in time solve the thing. His video on cognitive bias is a treasure trove of information. In the description, Jack recommends a TED Talk from Michael Shermer, publisher of Skeptic magazine, who speaks about the brain as a pattern detection device and the pitfalls that come with that. The scientific research Jack discusses in this lecture led him to be a skeptic in the chase, saying that any patterns, any connections he found, he considered them coincidence until proven otherwise. Think about that. Most searchers were scouring for patterns. The man who found it said, "I don't need to look for patterns. My brain is already adept at doing it, and will do it whether I want it to or not. And in fact, it will find many patterns and connections that are not real. I need to ride the brakes on this tendency. I need to combat the mind's proclivity to make associations and find connections." Under the discussion of complexity bias, the finder tells us what he thinks are the most important Fenn quotes in the chase. They're the ones where Forrest said, "You're missing something obvious." Jack poses a provocative question. Are we missing the obvious or dismissing the obvious? He says it's not for lack of seeing. We're not missing it. We're dismissing it. In a tidy little statement at about 34:20, Jack reiterates that the chase was not about puzzles and codes and all that. It was about an elderly man contemplating death and sharing his life, his story, including his passion for chasing after relics from the past. Jack says, it's a challenge of empathy. Now that we know that Jack wasn't just intelligent or intuitive, but correct in his approach, a video like this is huge. If you ever wondered which approach to the poem and memoir was correct, this video, along with other statements from the finder, points in one direction. So Christmas came early. Under the tree on the 7th, we unwrapped more information than at any other time in the chase, through the Outside article, the second Medium article, and Shiloh's supporting statement from the family. Also, the Outside and the Medium articles contained one new photo each. But we also got a couple of stocking stuffers in the form of Jack's outstanding video and the raw footage from the New Mexico tourism shoot. But wait, there's more. Jack very kindly began answering emails right away, and on the 10th, he compiled about 15 of these into a post for Dale's site. And it's a Christmas miracle. He promised to do 6 questions with Jenny Kyle. Let's take a look at Jack Gets Mail. I want to look at just one of these emails and point out how it really fleshes out our timeline for Jack's 3 search seasons. Based on the Outside and Medium articles, we know that Jack located the general area for Forrest's final resting place in the off-season prior to going boots on the ground in 2018. And we learned that during that season, he found the fake blaze and he called Forrest in a bit of a panic. But this email here is so helpful. Jack shares that he didn't know what blaze he was looking for, and he wasn't systematic enough. Not exactly sure what he means by that. Then we learn that during the next off-season, Jack fixed those 2 problems. He identified the blaze, he knew what he was looking for, and he planned for a more systematic approach to searching this area. During that season, he was successful and found the real blaze, but it was damaged and apparently no longer did its work of pointing to the treasure. Leading up to this year's search season, Jack came up with a new strategy. He was going to imagine how the blaze had been damaged and then try to find that, whatever that means. Then we know that very early in the 2020 search season, Jack hit pay dirt. Lastly, I want to share some email correspondence I had with Jack, which clarifies a number of points concerning this timeline. This quote makes it sound like Jack found the treasure and met with Forrest the same day, but his first statements here give a fuller picture. I didn't want to move the treasure chest without his explicit permission, so I left it there and emailed him the night of June 5th. This means Jack found the chest Friday and emailed Forrest that night. I went back the next day and retrieved it with his permission. He was waiting for me to call back to confirm I had it in my possession before making the announcement. I asked, "Why ask permission? The poem says take it, and Forrest never suggested you need that." If I had somehow found it my first boots on the ground, I probably would have just taken it and told him after. But the more I thought about it over my months in the chase, the more I wanted it explicit from him and not just dependent on words in a poem. Just being careful. We all knew this thing could turn into a legal hot potato. Did you send Forrest a photograph Friday night? The twig photo? Did he get back to you that night? Yes and yes. He did get back to me, and we talked. You said Forrest was waiting for your call Saturday. Did he need to see it with his own eyes Saturday night before making the announcement? I wasn't in a rush. I think I slept in, spent some time enjoying the location one last time, carefully and methodically retrieved it, and called him not long after I had it in the car. So retrieval and delivery didn't both take place on Saturday, only the former. Right, it took me time to get down there from Wyoming. I stopped for the night at a hotel. It's funny how people who trusted Forrest about the treasure stopped doing so once it was found. And people who thought they were smart enough to find the chest can't conceive of anyone else doing it. In some ways, conspiracies are easy. You merely ask a question, and for some people this constitutes proof. However, as we get more and more information and hear a consistent, plausible story from multiple parties, it gets harder and harder to entertain what Shiloh called conspiratorial nonsense. The question of motive alone puts to rest most of the nonsense. The family doesn't need money, and the chase was never a family business. The point being, they have no motive for propping up the legacy of the chase, which has now involved a U.S. District Court and would necessitate perjury. There's no motive. Let's follow Jack's advice and respect the principle of Occam's razor. The simplest explanation is best. Jack may not have given us the ultimate answer, but it's not difficult to imagine why, and he's actually given us a ton. What approach should we take to the poem? Is it straightforward or fanciful, even metaphorical? In the great logic versus imagination debate, which one should take precedence? Where do we look for hints in the memoir? Is this an armchair treasure hunt? Do we need to crack ciphers or decode coordinates? How crucial is determining the final resting place? Do you need to solve all 9 clues? What's the biggest obstacle to solving this? The man who cracked this thing wide open has answered all of these questions, and more are forthcoming. So for being the finder, I say congratulations. And for providing us a map to follow in your footsteps, thank you.